mean, he was Andre the Giant. He's the one that laid the groundwork for Hulk Hogan, for Stone Cold Steve Austin, for The Rock, for anybody else that walks through these doors of the WWE Universe. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Andre the Giant.
He was huge, bigger than any man had a right to be. So big that when he walked into a room, everyone in it felt smaller. So big that when he stood in the ring, the ropes looked like string wrapped around his legs. So big that the greatest star wrestling had ever produced had to stop, think twice, and wonder what might happen next. That star was Hulk Hogan. The moment was WrestleMania III. And for the first time in his career, Hogan stood across from another man and truly did not know what was coming. Andre the Giant is remembered today as a legend, a name that still means something powerful, even to people who never watched him wrestle a single match live. Most fans picture a gentle giant, a kind soul, a smiling man who made children laugh at ringside and posed happily for photographs. That picture is not false, but it is only half the story. Behind that smile was a man who could turn cold in a single second. Behind that gentle image was someone who controlled an entire locker room with one long stare. Behind the legend was a man that even the toughest, most fearless wrestlers in the world were careful never to upset. This is the side of Andre that fans rarely hear about. This is the frightening side. And while we look back at why so many legends feared him, use the hype feature to give this video some hype. Because stories like this are why Andre still feels larger than life, even decades after he last stepped into a ring. To understand why that night mattered so much, you have to understand what Andre already represented before he ever stepped through the curtain. He had spent years traveling the world, wrestling in packed arenas on almost every continent, billed everywhere as the eighth wonder of the world. Promoters loved him because a single look at his size sold tickets before a single punch was ever thrown. Fans loved him because nothing else in the world looked quite like him. But wrestlers who actually worked beside him, night after night, carried a very different relationship with that same size. To them, it was not just a selling point. It was something they had to live with, plan around, and respect every single time they stepped into the ring with him. To really understand why Andre frightened so many of his peers, it helps to break that fear down into three simple parts. The first was his sheer, impossible size, a body so large that the ordinary rules of leverage and strength simply did not apply to him the way they applied to everyone else in the business. The second was his mood, which could shift without warning from playful and warm to cold and genuinely dangerous, leaving the people around him constantly guessing which version of Andre they were dealing with on any given night. The third was his power to punish anyone who crossed him, a power he used carefully, rarely, but unforgettably, whenever he truly felt it was needed. Every story in this video touches on one or more of these three things. Together, they explain exactly why a man so widely loved by fans could also be so widely feared by the very people who knew him best. Long before that night at WrestleMania III, the entire company had been holding its breath. Vince McMahon had built an enormous show around one single moment. Hulk Hogan, the biggest hero the WWF had ever created, was going to attempt to lift Andre the Giant clean off his feet and slam him down onto the mat. On paper, it sounds simple enough. In reality, nobody around the company was completely sure it could be done. Andre weighed well over 500 pounds. His body had been slowly breaking down for years under the weight of his own size. And to make matters worse, Andre himself had not told Hogan exactly what he planned to allow that night. Hogan has spoken openly about this moment many times since. He has called it the single most frightening experience of his entire career, not because he feared losing the match. That was never really the concern. He feared something far bigger than a result on a scoreboard. He did not know whether Andre would actually let the slam happen at all. He did not know whether his own body could physically manage to lift a man of that size off the canvas. And more than anything else, he did not know if Andre, caught in one of his difficult and unpredictable moods, might simply choose not to cooperate and hurt him instead, right there in front of the largest crowd wrestling had ever gathered. Hogan later remembered standing near Andre before the match and seeing something that did not look entirely human. Andre's legs hung loosely over the ring ropes, and the sight reminded Hogan of something you might see on a farm rather than inside a wrestling ring. He compared it directly to a Clydesdale horse. That is no small animal. A Clydesdale is one of the largest working horses in the world, an animal built to pull enormous loads without effort. That is exactly what Andre's body looked like to Hogan that night. Not simply a big man, something closer to a force of nature standing quietly in the corner, waiting. In his own words, Hogan admitted the fear plainly and without embarrassment. He said, "I was worried because I didn't know if I could get him up. Tell you the truth." Sit with that sentence for a moment. This is Hulk Hogan speaking, the strongest, most confident hero wrestling had ever produced, a man who rarely showed fear in front of cameras. Yet backstage, hours before the biggest match of his entire life. He privately admitted that he genuinely did not know if his own body could lift the giant waiting beside him. Think carefully about the position Hogan found himself in that night. Thousands of fans had packed into the building. Millions more were watching from home, many of them seeing this exact match for the very first time in their lives. Every single person in that audience believed the outcome was already decided. They believed the hero would win. They believed Andre would fall exactly the way giants always fall in stories told to children. Hogan alone understood a very different truth standing in that locker room. He understood that simple belief and hard reality were two completely different things, especially when the man waiting across the ring weighed over 500 pounds and had said almost nothing about his real plans for that night. The uncomfortable truth is that Andre held almost all the power in that match, long before the bell ever rang. Hogan's face was on every poster, but Andre was the one who ultimately decided how the story would end that night. If Andre had simply chosen not to fall, there was very little Hogan, or anyone else backstage, could have done to change that outcome. Wrestlers have a term for this situation. They call it becoming an inert mass. If a performer plants his feet, tenses his body, and refuses to move, there is no realistic way for an opponent to lift or shift him unless he willingly allows it. Andre understood this simple, brutal truth completely. He had relied on it his entire career, and everyone around him knew it too. That is the real story, hiding quietly behind wrestling's most famous body slam. It was never just two performers working together for a crowd. It was one giant privately deciding whether or not to let history unfold exactly as planned. Hogan walked into that ring without a guaranteed answer. That uncertainty, more than the size itself, is what made the moment so genuinely frightening. Wrestlers who spent real time around Andre often repeated the same simple warning to newcomers. You never truly knew what he was going to allow until the very second it happened in front of you. This idea of an inert mass sounds simple on the surface, but it carried enormous weight inside the wrestling business. In almost every match, both performers cooperate constantly, even during the roughest-looking exchanges. A slam only looks real because the man being slammed helps create that illusion with his own body, timing his fall, adjusting his weight, working with his opponent rather than against him. Andre could remove that cooperation completely, at any moment without warning. If he simply stiffened his body and stood his ground, there was no trick, no technique, and no amount of strength that could force him to move. That single fact placed him above almost every ordinary rule the business normally relied upon to keep matches safe and predictable for everyone involved. Everyone around him understood this quiet, unspoken danger, and it shaped how carefully people spoke to him, worked with him, and planned matches around him for years. This same uncertainty followed Andre far beyond the ring itself. It followed him backstage, into hotels, and onto aeroplanes traveling between towns. Bobby Heenan, who managed Andre for years and traveled constantly at his side, understood this reality better than almost anyone else in the business. Heenan often explained that the locker room operated under an unspoken order, a set of rules nobody ever wrote down on paper, yet everyone respected without question. And sitting quietly at the very top of that unwritten order was Andre the Giant. Heenan described Andre plainly as the undisputed boss of the entire locker room. Nobody challenged his mood when it turned difficult. Nobody dared argue with him during one of his darker moments. Even people who had nothing at all to do with professional wrestling could feel this same quiet power radiating from him. Heenan remembered flights where cabin staff simply avoided approaching Andre if he had been drinking heavily. His enormous size alone turned an ordinary situation, sitting quietly on a crowded plane, into something that felt genuinely dangerous to the people seated nearby, even when nothing at all was actually happening. This kind of caution was not limited to Andre's managers or closest traveling companions. It extended to almost everyone who crossed his path outside the ring, from hotel staff to ordinary members of the public who happened to recognize him in an airport. People who had never watched a single wrestling match in their lives still understood, almost instinctively, that a man of Andre's size deserved a wide, respectful distance, especially if his mood seemed even slightly uncertain. Life on the road in professional wrestling during that era meant constant travel, cramped airplane seats, long bus rides, and endless nights in unfamiliar hotels. For most wrestlers, this simply meant discomfort. For the people traveling alongside Andre, it meant something closer to careful management. A normal-sized man causing trouble on a flight is an inconvenience. A man standing 7 feet 5 inches tall, weighing over 500 pounds, causing trouble on that same flight is an entirely different situation altogether. Heenan understood this reality every single day he spent by Andre's side. and it shaped how he approached his job as manager just as much as anything that happened inside the ring. Heenan summed it up in one simple, unforgettable line. He said, "When a guy gets on the plane and he's 7'5" and he's 550 pounds and he's smashed, don't bring him tools." At first, it almost sounds like a joke between old friends. Underneath the humor, though, sits a very real warning. Do not give this man any reason to become upset. Do not hand him anything, even by accident, that could turn into a weapon in his enormous hands. That single sentence tells you almost everything you need to know about how carefully people treated Andre's moods. Around him, caution was never optional. It was simply the rule. Ted DiBiase understood this world just as closely as Heenan did, perhaps even more so. Known to fans as the $1 Million Man, DiBiase carried himself with confidence and charisma in front of the cameras. But backstage, he was known as a thoughtful, observant performer who paid close attention to the culture surrounding him. DiBiase spent a great deal of time traveling alongside Andre throughout the late 1980s, and he watched firsthand how the giant silently judged the people surrounding him. Andre did not need long conversations or careful introductions to decide whether he liked someone. He seemed to sense it almost instantly, often within moments of meeting a person for the first time. And once his mind was made up, there was very little room left to change it. DiBiase explained Andre's private, unwritten code in a remarkably simple way. He said, "If Andre liked you, there's about a 98% chance that you're a pretty good guy. If Andre didn't like you, number one, he made you know it, and chances are you're a real dip." That single statement reveals something important about who Andre truly was. He was not cruel without any reason at all. His judgment of people, according to those who knew him, was usually fairly accurate. But if he decided someone was not a genuinely good person, he made absolutely certain that everyone around that person understood his feelings too. There was nowhere to hide from Andre's quiet disapproval once it settled on you. This single trait explains why so many wrestlers moved so carefully around him at all times. Respect was never simply handed to Andre because of his size alone. It had to be earned through honest behavior, and it could be lost almost instantly through arrogance. Those who treated the business, and the people working within it, with real honesty tended to stay safe around him. Those who did not soon discovered exactly how frightening Andre could become when his patience finally ran out. DiBiase's closeness to Andre meant he witnessed this pattern play out again and again, across different towns, different arenas, and different years of touring together on the road. Wrestlers who worked hard, respected the veterans around them, and stayed humble tended to earn a quiet nod of approval from Andre, and that approval mattered enormously inside a locker room, where his opinion carried more weight than almost anyone else's. Wrestlers who cut corners, disrespected the business, or treated their opponents carelessly rarely stayed on Andre's good side for very long. DiBiase often said that watching Andre judge a room told you more about the people in it than almost anything else could. Nobody learned that particular lesson more painfully than Hacksaw Jim Duggan, a wrestler whose entire reputation was built on toughness, grit, and an unwillingness to back down from anyone, regardless of their size or standing in the business. Fans knew him for his booming voice, his patriotic energy, and the wooden plank he swung with real force during his matches. Duggan was known throughout the industry for his toughness and his fearless attitude. He carried a wooden 2x4 to the ring every night and was never afraid of a genuine physical confrontation. But even Duggan later admitted that working closely with Andre could feel genuinely scary at times. Not because Andre was cruel without cause, but because if you struck him too hard or angered him in the wrong way, his entire mood could shift in an instant, from a playful giant into something far more serious and far more dangerous. During one particular encounter, Duggan struck Andre with his signature wooden plank, exactly as planned as part of the performance. But in that moment, Andre did not take it as simple entertainment. His response was immediate, physical, and completely real. He grabbed Duggan by the throat and began choking him slowly down towards the mat. Duggan later described the moment in raw, honest detail. He said, "Andre's got me by the throat, and he's choking me down. He's choking me down. He's choking me down." Notice the repetition in his own words. That repetition tells you exactly how long those seconds must have felt while it was happening. Blood began pouring down Duggan's chest as Andre continued holding him there, unwilling to let go. Duggan later called this the single most dangerous moment of his entire wrestling career. Pause on that admission for a second. This is a man who wrestled professionally for decades, absorbed countless brutal bumps, and stood across the ring from some of the toughest, most punishing opponents the business ever produced. Yet one encounter with an angered Andre stood above every single one of those moments as the most frightening thing he ever experienced inside a ring. That single fact tells you almost everything you need to understand about what Andre was truly capable of once pushed too far. What makes this story so unsettling is how quickly the mood shifted. One moment, Duggan and Andre were performing a planned exchange in front of a crowd, expecting an ordinary match. The next moment, that plan disappeared entirely, replaced by something far more real and far more physical. There was no warning shouted out loud, no visible signal given to anyone watching from ringside, and no clear moment where the shift from performance to reality could be pointed to directly. Andre's hand simply closed around Duggan's throat, and the performance became something else completely. Wrestlers who witnessed similar moments across Andre's career often described this same unpredictable switch, the sudden and total shift from cooperation to genuine controlled aggression, arriving without any clear signal at all. If Duggan's story shows a sudden flash of real anger, Bam Bam Bigelow's story shows something far colder and far more deliberate, a lesson that was planned rather than provoked in the heat of the moment. In 1987, inside the legendary Madison Square Garden, Andre made a quiet decision that Bigelow needed to be taught a hard, unforgettable lesson. Bigelow was a large, remarkably athletic young wrestler who had been pushed extremely quickly through the ranks by the company. Several of the older, more experienced wrestlers felt he was becoming far too confident, far too fast, and Andre quietly agreed with every one of them. During their match that night, in front of an enormous sold-out crowd, Andre completely abandoned any normal sense of a scripted performance. He stepped deliberately and heavily onto Bigelow's head. He choked him without hesitation. He beat him around the ring with a level of controlled force that had absolutely nothing to do with entertaining the audience. This was not a show for the cameras. This was real punishment, delivered publicly, inside one of the single most famous and important arenas in all of professional wrestling. Bigelow was left so badly shaken by the experience that he walked straight out of the building immediately after the match ended, and he quit the company on the spot. Years later, he spoke about that terrifying night with surprising honesty and openness. He said, "Andre tried to kill me in Madison Square Garden. He stepped right on my head, picked me up and tried choking me out, and I was like, oh God, don't go out, don't go out. This is the Square Garden main event." Even while genuinely fearing for his own safety in that moment, part of Bigelow's mind stayed fixed on the fact that all of this was happening in front of thousands of paying witnesses, inside the most important building in wrestling. What makes Bigelow's story even more remarkable is what he chose to say about it years afterwards. He eventually admitted that Andre's brutal, public humbling turned out to be one of the very best things that ever happened to his career. It forced him to mature quickly inside an industry where careless arrogance could easily get a young performer seriously hurt. Andre was not simply cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was enforcing a harsh, deeply physical form of discipline that shaped how an entire generation of younger wrestlers behaved for years afterwards. Word of what happened that night traveled quickly through every locker room in the country. Wrestlers who had not even been present in Madison Square Garden still heard the story within days, told and retold by people who had watched it happen firsthand. The message spread almost as fast as the beating itself, boasting about money, disrespecting the veterans who had spent years building the business, or acting as though success had already been earned, could bring consequences far more serious than a bad review from a promoter. It could bring Andre the Giant standing quietly in the corner, deciding that a lesson needed to be taught in front of the entire wrestling world. To understand why Andre took this kind of enforcement so seriously, and why so many veterans quietly supported him doing it, it helps to remember what the wrestling business looked like during the 1980s. For years, wrestling had operated through separate regional territories, each with its own promoters, its own stars, and its own slow, careful system for teaching young wrestlers respect through hard work and time served. As the business expanded into a single national product, some new performers arrived with flashy looks and quick pushes, skipping past years of dues paying that older wrestlers had been forced to complete. Veterans like Andre saw this shift as a genuine threat to the culture that had shaped the entire industry. When a young performer seemed to forget that culture, Andre often felt a responsibility to remind them of it, in whatever way he judged necessary. The Ultimate Warrior learned a strikingly similar lesson, although through a completely different set of circumstances. Warrior was famous throughout his career for his explosive, chaotic, high-energy style inside the ring. He moved fast, hit incredibly hard, and rarely slowed down for anybody standing across from him. When he first began working matches with Andre, he kept clotheslining him at full, unrestrained force, night after night, ignoring the repeated warnings Andre quietly gave him to ease off. Andre remained patient at first, giving Warrior more than one honest chance to adjust his reckless style, but even a giant's patience has clear limits. On the third night in a row, as Warrior came charging across the ring at full, blistering speed, Andre simply raised his enormous fist and held it perfectly still in the air. Warrior ran directly into it, face first, at full velocity, and was knocked completely unconscious in the middle of the ring, in front of a live audience who had no idea what they had just witnessed. Bobby Heenan, watching everything unfold from ringside, described the entire moment with vivid, clinical detail. He said, "Here comes Warrior 100, 200 miles an hour, just as he gets to him, puts the hand up, stops, and cold cracks the paint. He grabs the rope and almost goes down, doesn't know where he's at. Next night, here he comes. And Andre looks down at me. He's learning. That's how you teach him." Andre did not even bother pinning Warrior afterwards. He simply turned and walked calmly out of the ring, having made his point without needing to speak a single word to the man he had just knocked out cold. After that particular night, Warrior reportedly showed far greater respect and care whenever he worked alongside Andre from that point onward. It was an undeniably harsh way to learn such an important lesson, but it clearly worked exactly as intended. Andre rarely needed lengthy speeches or heated arguments to correct someone's behavior. A single moment of carefully controlled violence was often more than enough to permanently change how a wrestler treated him afterwards. What stands out most about this particular story is the sheer calm control Andre showed throughout the entire moment. He did not lash out in sudden anger the way he had with Duggan. He gave warnings first, more than once, allowing Warrior every reasonable chance to correct his own behavior before anything serious happened. Only after those warnings were ignored, night after night, did Andre finally act. And even then, his response was measured rather than wild. One still fist, held perfectly steady, was all it took. There was no shouting, no chase, no extended confrontation, just a single, decisive moment that ended the matter completely and permanently. Not every single conflict Andre faced during his career was purely physical in nature. Some of it ran far deeper, into genuinely psychological territory, and few relationships captured that reality better than the one between Andre and Jake, the Snake Roberts. On screen, their rivalry became one of wrestling's most famous storylines, largely because of Jake's real snake, an animal that Andre had a genuine, paralyzing, lifelong fear of. Fans absolutely loved the drama unfolding on their televisions. Few of them realized just how real that underlying fear truly was, on both sides of the story. Most of Andre's fear came from his body. This particular rivalry was different, because it came from his mind. Wrestlers who worked with Andre for years said his fear of snakes was not an act of any kind. It was completely real, deep, and impossible for him to control, no matter how many times he told himself it was only a prop backstage. That kind of fear, sitting inside a man that size, created a strange and uneasy balance of power whenever Jake was nearby. Jake used Andre's genuine phobia to torment him constantly for the cameras. Yet privately, wrestling Andre terrified Jake almost as much in return. Inside the ring itself, Andre relied on his own quiet methods of physical control. He would stand directly on Jake's long hair, painfully pinning his head flat against the canvas, while simultaneously pulling both of Jake's arms backward at the same time, stretching him in a way that caused very real, sustained pain. This was never simple performance for the cameras. It was Andre demonstrating, in the clearest way possible, exactly how much total control he held over another man's body whenever he chose to use it. Jake later summed up the blunt reality of working closely with Andre in a few short words. He said, "If you don't man up to him, he'll eat you." That single phrase captures something important about the entire culture surrounding Andre backstage. Simple fear alone was never quite enough to survive working alongside him. Wrestlers needed to show a genuine amount of courage and honest self-respect, or Andre would quickly take advantage of any weakness he sensed hiding underneath. Even Jake, who tormented Andre's greatest personal fear on camera for months at a time, still deeply respected the physical and mental danger that came with standing directly across from him. There is something almost strange about this particular rivalry when you stop to think about it properly. Here were two men, each holding a genuine fear over the other, locked into the same storyline for months on end. Jake carried a real snake that could send Andre into a state of total, paralyzed panic. Andre carried the physical power to hurt Jake badly, at any moment he chose, inside the ring. Neither man ever fully let his guard down around the other. That constant, quiet tension between two very different kinds of fear helped make their entire program feel unusually real to anyone watching closely. Long before either man said a single word about it publicly, Rowdy Piper found himself facing a remarkably similar reality. Despite being widely regarded as one of the greatest trash talkers the entire business had ever produced, Piper built his entire legendary career around being utterly fearless with words, always ready to provoke, insult, and unsettle whichever opponent stood in front of him. But even Piper openly admitted that Andre made him genuinely nervous in a way that very few other performers ever managed to achieve. During their time working together, Andre used simple physical dominance to remind Piper, very clearly, exactly who held the real power between them. In one particular encounter, Andre attempted to embarrass Piper physically in front of a watching crowd, a crude and deeply uncomfortable show of control that left very little room for genuine argument afterwards. Piper later spoke carefully about that specific moment, admitting, "Andre had which I knew, he's going to, but I didn't know with what gumption he was trying to have, and then later on, try to stick his thumb was so much fun." Piper's own words are not really describing comedy at all. They describe the deep discomfort of never quite knowing how far Andre might genuinely go, and having very little real way to stop him once he chose to push further. Piper had spent his entire career learning how to unsettle other people, using nothing but his voice and his attitude to get inside an opponent's head before a match even began. Very few performers ever managed to turn that same tactic back onto Piper himself. Andre managed it without saying very much at all. His presence alone did most of the work. Piper, a man who feared almost nobody in the wrestling business, still chose his words and his actions carefully whenever Andre was standing nearby, and that alone says a great deal about the kind of respect and the kind of caution Andre commanded from absolutely everyone around him. Piper's honesty about this moment matters because of who he was inside the business. Wrestling fans of that era knew Piper as a man who feared nothing and nobody, someone who would happily provoke anyone standing in front of a camera, regardless of size or reputation. For that same man to admit genuine uncertainty around Andre tells you something important. It tells you that Andre's presence operated on a completely different level from ordinary intimidation. It was not about clever insults or backstage politics. It was about raw, physical uncertainty, the simple not knowing of what a man that size might genuinely choose to do next, at any moment, without warning, in front of a live crowd. Even wrestlers who had already reached legendary status found themselves quietly humbled by Andre's sheer, overwhelming physical presence. Ric Flair, one of the most respected and consistently successful performers of his entire era, a man who held championship gold across multiple decades and wrestled thousands of matches against nearly every notable name in the business, traveled with Andre early in his career, and frequently drove him between small towns across the territories. Flair understood, better than almost anyone else in the business, just how overwhelming Andre's body truly was, both inside the ring and far away from it. Flair openly described Andre as a mass, a mountain of a man, someone who simply took complete control of any situation the very moment he stood upright. Veteran wrestlers who trained younger performers to face Andre for the first time gave one simple, repeated piece of advice: relax. There genuinely was not much else you could realistically do. If Andre chose to stand firm and refuse to move, no amount of skill, experience, or careful strategy would ever be enough to shift him. Flair also personally confirmed one of the more disturbing stories connected to Andre's enormous size, involving the veteran wrestler Pedro Morales. During one match, Andre fell directly on top of Morales, and the smaller man found himself completely trapped underneath roughly 500 pounds of unmoving, dead weight. There was genuinely nothing Morales could do to free himself, until Andre eventually chose to shift his own body away. Flair's own words summed up the entire situation perfectly. He said, "He's a mass, a mountain of a man, he just takes you over. The boss just said have relax, but when he's standing up, not a chance." This was never simple exaggeration for effect. This was the plain, terrifying truth of what it genuinely meant to be caught underneath Andre the Giant during a live match. Flair had faced almost every major star of his generation, across a career spanning decades, and very few of them ever left him searching for words the way Andre did. Most opponents could be studied, planned for, and countered with the right strategy. Andre broke that entire pattern completely. There was no clever counter for pure, immovable size. There was no strategy that worked against a man who could simply choose to stay upright and let gravity do the rest of the work for him. Flair's honesty about this reality, coming from a wrestler widely regarded as one of the very best to ever step into a ring, tells you just how far outside normal boundaries Andre truly existed. Behind every single one of these stories about raw power and genuine fear, there existed another quieter layer to Andre that many fans completely overlooked at the time. Andre the Giant was truly scary indeed. He was dangerous. He was painful for anyone to face. But above absolutely everything else described here, he remains one of professional wrestling's true and lasting icons. A giant whose story continues to frighten, fascinate, and inspire, long after he left the ring for the very last time. Every generation of wrestling fans discovers these stories for themselves eventually, usually through old footage, faded interviews, or the honest words of the very men who lived through them. And every single time, the reaction tends to be the same: surprise, that the smiling giant from old photographs carried this much genuine danger underneath the surface. Respect for the wrestlers brave enough to admit real fear in an industry that so often demands toughness above all else, and a quiet kind of awe at the thought that one single man, through nothing more than his own body and his own presence, could shape the behavior of an entire locker room without ever needing to explain himself. That is the lasting power of Andre the Giant's story. It is not simply a tale about size. It is a story about the kind of fear that comes from genuine unpredictability, the kind of respect that comes from earned caution, and the kind of legend that only grows stronger the more honestly it gets told. Decades from now, new fans will still be discovering these same accounts for the first time, and they will likely feel exactly what audiences feel today: a mixture of disbelief, fascination, and quiet respect for a man who remains, in every real sense, one of a kind. Every wrestler who shared these memories did so with a certain kind of care, the kind reserved for someone who genuinely mattered to them, someone whose presence shaped their entire understanding of what it truly meant to work inside a wrestling ring.